ภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมาสามิ The other day, at tea time, we were discussing the short extract from the teachings of Bhattikaki. One of the subjects that we touched on briefly was the role of thinking and labeling, as it was rendered in the translation, in the practice of Dharma. And I've been considering this subject somewhat, and in particular the role of saññā, perception, in our lives as bhikkhus, samaneras, or as samanas. And I remember from my early training, in particular, how much emphasis was placed on the development of the conscious development of it is called Samanasaññā. That is the perception of oneself as a samana. And this is treated in the sutta, which we chant a translated version on occasions, the 10 recollections, frequent recollections of one who has gone forth. And the first recollection, I prefer the Thai rendering, which I'll translate as: we have now entered a special or elevated, different status. We've through this ceremony of papaccā or of upasampada, we have taken on a new role, a new status. And certainly for almost everyone, I'm sure, it is a conventional change. It's not one which obviously automatically confers any kind of purity or wisdom, but even so, one finds now that as having entered the ranks of those who've gone forth, then standards of behavior that we live by have immediately been raised, and many kinds of behavior which worldly, or anybody outside the Sangha would consider probably quite innocuous, quite normal, would, if performed by a monk or a novice, be considered very gross behavior. For example, playing sports, playing basketball or something. If we were all to, after the drink, let's divide into two teams and have a game of basketball. I mean, people who had nothing to do with bhikkhus, say like in small Australian towns, they think it would be quite sort of nice thing to do, expression of group harmony, and so on. But why is it that we get this feeling we just wouldn't even conceive of doing that, and then somehow would feel really kind of awkward and wouldn't enjoy it. I mean, I know I wouldn't enjoy it because this is Samanasaññā. You begin through living the life, through spending time with other samanas, through learning the Vinaya, through your practice training. You begin to the feeling of what this word samana means. It's one of those very difficult words that even as adept translator as Bhikkhu Bodhi hasn't really been able to come up with a very good translation. He uses the word recluse, which I find very unsatisfactory. Always reminds me of Howard Hughes, recluse millionaires and things like that. It doesn't really, for me, evoke the sense of what samana means. It's a peaceful one, one who is intent on nibbana. And so this is something to be consciously developed. This reflection on what it means to wear this robe, what it means to live this life. And my first teacher, to whom obviously I have a great deal of gratitude, was a bhikkhu in Thailand for 5-6 years, and yet he was, I don't think although he has very naturally very kind of monastic personality, if you like, if there is such a thing, and someone who's quite a natural dispassion towards worldly enjoyments, but as someone who never really had a feel for what it meant to be a monk. I don't think he ever really experienced that in the way that perhaps we do. And so it was a kind of a convenient way to be able to meditate full time without having to work and without having to any other kind of pressures on him. And so he really valued that as a certain period of his time in which he was able to devote himself wholeheartedly to formal meditation. And then when he felt that particular phase of his life had passed, then he gave up the robe and went back to the West. So it was, for him, it was kind of a something to do for a few years. But he wasn't interested in the form itself, or in the beauty or the nobility of the life. No sense of the bhikkhu life as being, the most appropriate and beautiful way that a being devoted to the realization of nibbana could live. So if you don't have that kind of underlying faith and commitment, then so much of the life can lose its grounding, and then you start picking and choosing, and especially with regards to Vinaya, for instance. Okay, I can see the value of this rule, and that makes some sense. That's going to be helpful in my practice, so I'll keep that. And But on the other hand, this rule and that one is just actually a real hassle. It just makes things difficult, and it's probably outdated anyway. And so you get into this picking and choosing kind of mental state. And so you never really appreciate the form of the samana which the Buddha laid down for us. And I remember Ajahn Jayasaro was saying, if you don't keep the vinaya, it means you have no respect for the Buddha. And he was very kind of blunt about it, because if you have the faith that the Buddha was fully enlightened, and that his teachings are sawakata dhamma, that they're well taught teachings, and then the Buddha says that as bhikkhus you should avoid certain kinds of behavior and you should behave in certain ways. If you say, no, I accept your Dhamma, your teachings on meditation are very profound, but these other things you're teaching, I'm not interested in. Because you see the kind of arrogance of that approach, and how when you have that kind of what's in it for me kind of attitude, then you're never going to develop the Samanasaññā. So developing Samanasaññā is dependent on, firstly of course, on faith and willingness to give up your own comfort and your own ideas and opinions. It also requires studying and learning the nuts and bolts, the details, because that feeling or that intuition is not some kind of mysterious thing that arises from nowhere. It arises from study and through application, just as any kind of task, say playing a musical instrument or touch typing or whatever. After the initial very awkward phase is over, then you get to that point where you don't have to think about it anymore. And if you put a finger on the wrong key, then you're immediately aware of it. Or if you play a wrong note, maybe someone who's not so discerning, who's listening in the audience, might not realize, but you realize. And this is somewhat comparable to Samanasaññā, and this is such a refuge to you, or to all of us in our lives, when quite a lot of the time you're not under close supervision. Most obvious case if you're off on tudong, but even in the monastery, so many hours of the day where you're by yourself, so many times where you have a choice to act in the way of samana or to act in a worldly way, to act or speak in a way which comes from defilement and strengthens defilement, strengthens the worldly ruts in our mind, or ways which are countering those old habits and gradually wearing them smooth. So the Buddha said this is something to constantly recollect. I'm not a lay person anymore. I'm not living by worldly aims, aspirations. My goal is nibbana. I'm a member of the Buddhist Sangha, and having taken on this robe, there are responsibilities. Having become part of the Sangha, then we must make efforts to live up to that status. The Buddha says it's a different, or in the Thai translation, "Pen wana antang anpised." It's a different, it's a special kind of status. So that it's a convention, but this is the genius of human beings, that we can create conventions which can help us to go beyond the conditioned world. Sometimes we can get a bit dismissive, it's just a convention. But if you flip it over and you say, well, isn't it incredible that we have this ability to create conventions to aid us in the work that we're seeking to do. In the Majjhima, some of you may have read the sutta where the Buddha takes up this subject, and he says, samanas, you call yourself samanas. People ask you what you are, and you say samanas. You say, well, you should live up to that so that you're not misrepresenting yourself, and so that the people who offer you the four requisites will get the full fruit and benefit from it. And then the Buddha goes into the various practices which would allow us to or justify us in calling ourselves samanas. This is a purity of physical conduct, verbal conduct, mental conduct. So conduct which is clear and open, without deceit, and there's no disparity between the way you are when others can see you and the way you are in private. And there's no sense of conceit or looking down on others who are less pure than you are. And the Buddha goes on from the basic level of sila onto these three practices, which the Buddha says are never wrong. This is Ajahn Chah's translation. I'm not sure, it's probably a kind of a fancier way of saying it, but these are those three absolutely fundamental practices of a holy life. There's a sense restraint, moderation in taking of food, and wakefulness. These are absolutely basic to our way of life, absolutely basic to the effort to live as a samana. Slowly turning the eyes away from ears, nose, tongue, body, away from the indulgence in either the general characteristics or a particular aspect of its respective sense objects. Look at the willingness to do that. Often we can do it, but we don't want to do it. And developing that willingness to do it through, you want to live as a samana, you want to do it. You see, this is the way that leads to nibbana. So you're willing to give up that small, fleeting pleasure that comes from seeing a pleasant form and hearing a pleasant sound and so on, for the higher happiness which comes from freedom from that conditioned kind of knee-jerk reaction to pleasant impingement on the senses. Being one who knows moderation in taking of food, it's so easy just within a few short minutes in the day to adversely affect your whole practice for the day. Just taking a bit too much food, and you feel rotten for the rest of the day. Physically feel uncomfortable, and mentally feelings of guilt and shame, self-loathing and so on, which can last for hours. Having that ability to take just the right amount for what you need, and a wakefulness, applying oneself to practice, and the scheme that the Buddha gave us, whereby the nighttime period, 12-hour period, is divided into 3 watches of 4 hours each. the Buddha said that the first watch of the night, this from 6 till 10, should be one in which you devote to sitting and walking. The third watch from 2 a.m. till 6 for sitting and walking, with the middle watch of the night from 10 till 2 as being the time to lay down on one's right side, mindfully aware, with a firm determination to wake up in the morning. So whether one actually keeps to that, to the 3 watches of the night, or one prefers to go to sleep a bit earlier and get up earlier, or a bit later and get up later, that's not so important. The importance is that we're seeking to develop a willingness and a commitment to wakefulness, not taking refuge in sleep and dullness and unconsciousness. So those are the 3 pillars of life of a samana. The samana is one who doesn't delight in company and talking and socializing, doesn't seek warmth and refuge in the pleasures of the crowd, the excitement of society, but as one whose great joy is to be alone and to be developing the path, but one who does not have aversion to groups, and one is flexible enough to know right time and place, and to be able to contribute to the life of the community in a skillful, constructive, creative way. So if you don't want to talk to anybody and just want to sort of shut off and feel aversion to any kind of conversation, then that's not the middle way either, is it? That there's vibhava tanha, there's aversion in the mind. The sati is there, is telling us, is the mind balanced? Is the mind on the middle way, or is it falling into the gutters of liking and disliking, and attraction and aversion? Another aspect of the life as a samana, particularly is Theravada, as Theravada bhikkhus, forest bhikkhus, then we really can appreciate the sense of being totally dependent on the gifts and the kindness and the generosity of others. And this is the real renunciation that we make, is when you renounce the worldly state and you come in this special state. It's defined by this helplessness. It's not convenient. You can't do what you want to do. You can't go where you want to go. And then because this gets flipped over again in the wrong way. So I speak to Thai monks sometimes, monasteries where they use money. I couldn't give up using money. It's just not convenient. I couldn't go here and go there. Well, that's exactly the point, isn't it? I mean, that's what you give up. You give up this worldly ability to control your environment. And that's what money is. Money is the ability to control. Money is power. And so when you give up money, you're giving up power. You say, I'm powerless. That's just giving yourself to Buddha Dhamma, giving yourself to Dhamma Vinaya. And of course, any of us who've lived completely without money for any length of time, this is perfectly feasible. And even when you don't have the support structure of the monastery as we have here, even going on Tudong. I've done a fair amount of walking around, never found any problem at all. Of course, you don't, when you get thirsty, you can't sort of go into a shop and order a Pepsi or something. But just living on your parami is just such a wonderful feeling. And then, when somebody does, when I remember walking along the railway to Bangkok in the hot season, it's incredibly hot, and every now and again there's this incredible sound of Nimon Yoga, Nimon Chan Nam, and just get off that railway line and a little sort of dinky station by the road, and someone gives you a bottle of cold water or a soft drink or something, and it just tastes so incomparably more delicious than, if I'd had a few hundred baht in my yam, and that I could have bought something myself. And because the way the defilements are, you just can't draw a straight line between what's absolutely necessary and what's not. Okay, you say I've got 100 baht in my yam. I'm only going to use it if it's really necessary. You're walking along in 100-degree heat, and you're just running with sweat. I'm getting dehydrated. I really do need something to drink, and it's quite reasonable, isn't it, in that kind of situation. But it's the thin end of the wedge. But when you just give yourself up to the Buddha's parami and say, yeah, well, come what may, through with this faith that through the virtue or through the power of your sila and the purity of your sila, that you will survive, that you will be protected. And in the Jataka stories, or many cases, notice the power the tangible power that arises when someone maintains that kind of standard. There's so many times when the Bodhisattva or some other being makes this firm asseveration of truth. When you have maintained a practice in a certain way, there is something very special there. And it being said, in all the years that I've been ordained as a monk, I've never once touched money, or I've never once told a conscious lie, or I've never something like that. And then through the power of this truth, may such and such happen. May this person be healed of illness, and or whatever. And these quite magical things happen through that power that's accumulated. So this Samanasaññā, something to keep coming back to look at your actions, your speech, your practice. Is this the way of the samana? Is this the way praised by the Buddha? Again, in the 10 recollections as regards sila, we start off. Is there anything that I can criticize or anything I can see in my actions today, and the way that my speech today that's not appropriate for a samana? And if you look back over your actions and your speech, and you see clearly, no, there's nothing. It's blameless, pure in every detail, in every aspect. And then there's this pramodya, and this sense of well-being that arises, which is a firm foundation for samadhi. This is the way samadhi arises, through this non-worldly happiness that grows from the pramodya and the piti, through reflecting on purity of your sila, for example. But because defilements are so tricky, that the Buddha recommended that we should also ask ourselves, what if our teachers or wise bhikkhus were to be aware of our actions and speech in this period? Is there anything that they might criticize? And there's a subtle difference, isn't there, between those two reflections, because the tendency to shrug things off or to minimize the importance of certain actions in the first reflection doesn't really work or wash in the second, so that when we look at our behaviours, no, there's nothing I can really criticize myself for. Should be if I'd have spoken those words. Yes, maybe he wouldn't be so impressed. You see. And this is a way of really bringing up the Samanasaññā. So the state of the samana, every time we look at our robes, there's a reflection for us. How can we be worthy of this robe? How can we make the best of our time as bhikkhus? And one of the other reflections, isn't it, is the days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? The difficulty with this kind of reflection is it sounds so much like a cliche, and you have to work that much harder with those kinds of reflections, because the mind just tends to kind of slide off them a bit, because it can sound quite stale, and it can be stale unless you really work through the surface and really get into the body of it. The shortness and the impermanence and the unpredictability of things, something to bring the mind to again and again. And a couple of weeks ago I was invited to go to the house of a doctor who was dying of cancer, and went to visit him and gave him some encouragement. And this morning some of his friends and family came and said that his condition is really critical now, and he really wants to see you again before he dies, and he's in a lot of pain. And I said, well, how bad do you think it is? This is our silent day here, and it's not so convenient for me to go right now. What about if I was to go first thing tomorrow morning? I'll miss Bindabat and go before the meal, because after the meal I'm going off to Samakasanna. And they said, oh yes, that would be fine if that's convenient for you. And then this evening, just before the meeting, they came to see me and said that he died already during the day, so no need to go tomorrow morning. And this kinds of things are happening all the time, aren't they? And for a recent example, Lumpu Harm and the change in his fortunes and future, just like that. Again, how well are we spending our time? And the Buddha always saying, look, there are a foot of trees and empty buildings and caves and mountains. Go and meditate.
so that you won't feel remorse in future. If you get to the end of your life or something changes and you can't do it anymore. All the incredible support that we get here in Thailand, how stable is that? If the economy gets worse than it is, if there's a famine or a drought, floods, civil war, anything, these are not fantasies. Who's to say that these things are not going to happen in the next few years? So this word samana, bring it up. What is samana? How does a samana act? How does a samana speak? How does a samana use his mind? Gradually inclining the mind away from worldly habits, not just the very kind of gross, obvious ones, but the more subtle, innocuous ones. And it's a re-education of the mind. And it's then with the inspiration, the life of the samana, role of the samana, you have a real foundation for development of practice. And there's this, I have to get away from this idea of thinking like meditation is a kind of activity dependent on information, and that there are certain tricks or certain kind of shortcuts if you can just find the right teacher. And he enlightened teacher, he's the one who has the most information. He knows the most kind of shortcuts, and he's the one who can tell you just the words that you need to hear. He's going to be right on your wavelength, and he'll just say, no, don't do that, do this, or try that. And you'll hear these words from him, and you go away, and wonderful, all the problems are gone. And this idea that it's just the troubles that we're having at the moment, all the difficulties and with the niwaranas and hindrances, is because it kind of lacks this kind of special information and these special words. My own feeling is that, of course, information, advice from one who knows, who's further along the path. But in the end, the one who breaks through is the one who's ready, and the one who has developed the paramis, one who's developed the foundation, one who has the whole superstructure on which to build. And the Buddha says this is a gradual path. It's like going down to the ocean. It's not like just jumping off a diving board and going straight down to the depths of the ocean, but the water gradually shelves away. There's gradually shelving away and gradually deepening. And that deepening and that maturity comes about through training in Vinaya, through the development of all the paramis of giving, of sila, of renunciation, wisdom faculty, endurance, effort, truthfulness, adhitthana, metta, equanimity. Through giving, service, this constant attrition of all the old ego, self-cherishing, self-grasping ways of experiencing oneself in the world. And those worldly ways of thought, as you ordain and you develop, then they can take on very kind of spiritual guises and can be very deceptive. When you just pull away the wrapping, it's still me, mine, what's in it for me. And you have to be able to see through that, because as long as there's a me, mine, accumulation, getting, having, being, no matter how elevated the language, what the philosophy is, if that's the basic kind of motivation, then you're never on the middle path. The middle path is the path of the samana, the path of non-hurting, non-affliction of self and others. It's just the middle way. Developing sati on all postures or situations, letting go of the self-grasping. Effort, patience, endurance, putting forth this energy and constantly working on the defilements, rubbing away, wearing away, sitting, walking, and when it's time to work, we work, time to serve, we serve, time to talk, we talk, and to do everything just in harmony with what's appropriate, and developing that sensitivity to what is appropriate, to knowing time and place. This is a virtue of the sapurisa, the wise man, the sage. The sage knows time and place. So I'd like to just offer these few words of encouragement for your practice this evening.